Hello and welcome to the fourth lesson in the television unit of Component 2. This is our first text, Humans, and this session is on media industries to complete this small scheme of work. The learning objectives for this particular session is to consider the significance of economic factors on TV production. We're going to look at and explore the significance of the patterns of ownership and control in TV production. We're going to analyse how media organisations maintain, including through marketing, varieties of audiences, both nationally and globally. And we're going to have a quick look at the regulatory framework of contemporary media in the UK, and obviously this will be specifically looking at regulation in regards to television. So before we get started, just a couple of things to remind you that will supplement this lesson, or complement, whichever one's more appropriate. First of all, the other sessions that we've done on media, language, audience and representations. In particular, the session on audience, some of the parts that we look at in this industry sessions may go over those things again, reiterate some important points, but also add to your knowledge on this. The second thing to consider when looking at this session is the PDF document produced by Channel 4 called Britain's Creative Greenhouse, which is an excellent little, well I say little, it's about 30 odd pages, but quite easy to digest selection of information and infographics all about Channel 4 and its unique place in British television and broadcasting. Some of the information in that document is reproduced here just to consolidate and reinforce some of those ideas, but definitely give it a read before carrying on with this session, or if you haven't, certainly afterwards. So let's first of all look at a few facts to do with humans, things you might already know but just might serve as a little reminder about the show itself. The series began in 2015 and ran for 8 episodes in its first season, and each subsequent season, there have been 3 in total and the show is now finished, has also had 8 episodes. Its original broadcasters in the UK, as we've already mentioned, are Channel 4, and in the US it was broadcast by AMC. The show was actually a co-production between Channel 4, who commissioned Kudos Film and TV to make it for them, and distributors Shine and AMC in the US. So it was a kind of global multinational corporate production with numerous different production companies and distributors involved. Again, I'm sure you knew this, but it was based on a Swedish TV series called Real Humans, which itself ran for 20 episodes across 2 seasons and was sold to more than 50 different countries. The budget for the season Series 1 in the UK was £12 million, which is pretty high for a TV show, so it goes to already show you how much weight Channel 4 were putting behind this show. So whilst we're talking about money, let's consider the economic factors, including funding. This is a big part of any media product we look at. But a few things to consider and to make notes on. As I said, the show is produced by Channel 4, so a little bit of research into the history of this network will help us understand the context of the show in a bit more depth. And this is where reading that document, Britain's Creative Greenhouse, will really help you out. So let me just summarise some of the things about Channel 4. Channel 4 is a unique entity in British broadcasting, both commercially funded and a public service broadcaster. So it is a mixture of those two things. So essentially it's publicly owned, but it's also a not-for-profit organisation. The Channel 4 TV Corporation is a public corporation of the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, which was established in the 1990s. And the channel itself was established in 1982, so less than 40 years ago. And it was created specifically to provide a fourth television service to the UK, in addition to the licence-funded BBC One and BBC Two, and the single commercial broadcaster network ITV. So prior to 1982, there was only BBC One, BBC Two, and independent television ITV. this Channel 4 was introduced in the 80s to really provide a kind of gap in the market, a mixture of the two. So let's see how this fits in a kind of visual form with the other channels. So as I said, you've got your BBC, ITV, and Channel 5. You've got Sky and obviously multi-channel. Okay, now this model doesn't include streaming services, but they would fall in line with Sky and multi-channel by and large. So Channel 4 sits about here, okay, and I'll explain why. So on the left-hand side with the BBC, obviously you've got publicly funded. We pay for this through our licence fee. Then the money that we pay for the licence fee directly funds BBC TV network channels, BBC 1, 2, the now only online BBC 3, BBC 4 and BBC Parliament. But as you know, it also funds a number of radio stations, as well as the excellent online BBC site. On the right hand side, we've got commercially funded networks. This means that they're funded by advertising. Okay, corporations and companies that want to take up advertising space on Channel 4, Channel 5, ITV or Sky have to pay that, and that money goes towards paying for the production of these programs or paying production companies to make them for them. However, where this gets slightly interesting is that, as you know from studying other texts in Component 1, such as Late Night Women's Hour on Radio 4, the BBC has a public service broadcasting remit. That means it has to conduct a certain amount of, it has to live by an ethos. The programmes that it creates have to meet a certain criteria for it to be public service broadcasting, okay? And that is also true of Channel 4, ITV and Channel 5. Not to the same extent as the BBC, but to a certain extent. Any other channels, such as Sky and any other multi-channel services, are non-public. Okay, so what we've got there in that sort of collection of 5 channels, if you like, BBC 1, 2, ITV 4 and 5, we have what we call the terrestrial channels, which is a bit of an old-fashioned term, and it's the channels that you could receive through your aerial some years ago through an analogue service, but they still have a certain amount of public service remit. Okay, so that might seem that Channel 4 isn't unique. It might seem like, well, actually, surely Channel 4 is the same as ITV and Channel 5. But there's one final element that makes Channel 4 unique. It is actually, despite being commercially funded, okay, and the fact that it gets its money from private sources and not from the great British public, it's actually publicly owned, which means it's not for profit. Okay, it doesn't actually create TV programs in order to make the owners or the proprietors richer, as it were. It's there as a not-for-profit organisation. Okay, any money it makes as profit should go back into funding more TV shows, which is different to ITV, Channel 5 and the Sky multi-channel. If we want to get a sense of what this actually all means, let's break it down and look at a couple of sections at a time. First of all, this idea that something can be publicly owned or not-for-profit, and also commercially funded. So first of all, publicly owned organisations are run on this not-for-profit basis. This means they're designed to serve the interests of the public rather than the interests of the shareholders. Any surplus they make is reinvented as it goes towards the cost of making new TV shows. Essentially, they are non-profit making. Commercially funded channels are funded through advertising. They generate revenue by selling adverts, these spots in commercial breaks. Okay, the rate that an advertiser will charge is based on the time of day that the advert is shown, and of course the length of the advert as well. So, for example, peak time adverts are more expensive than daytime adverts, as more people will see it. A longer advert takes up more of the space of advertising, therefore it's more expensive. Another important source of revenue is sponsorship. When a company contributes towards a production costs in order to promote a brand, Companies may choose to sponsor a particular program or even a particular channel. Channel 4's drama output, for example, is sponsored by the car manufacturer Lexus, which a few of you have noticed as we've watched Humans. So let's have a look at the public servicing broadcasting part of this. Like the BBC, Channel 4 has a public service remit. They're there to fulfil a certain public purposes in accordance with their licence to broadcast. Otherwise, it could be revoked. All public service broadcasters are required to provide high-quality programmes that cover a wide range of subjects, which satisfies the needs and interests of as wide range of audiences as possible. The requirements set out in the 2003 Communications Act are intended to ensure that audiences that might otherwise be neglected are catered for, and that the quality and diversity are not compromised by the desire to maximise profits or audience figures. So in other words, these public service broadcasters have to fulfil certain criteria that reaches as many different people as possible, and shouldn't be compromised by the need to make profits for their sponsors or their advertisers. So let's have a look at what Ofcom says. The Office of Communications is the government department, Ofcom. What do they say that the main purposes of public service broadcasting are? First of all, inform our understanding of the world as an audience. They should stimulate knowledge and learning of arts, science, history, all subjects through accessible content, something that people can reach. They should reflect the United Kingdom's cultural identity through original programming at not only a national level but also a regional level as well. PSB should represent diversity and alternative viewpoints through programmes that reflect the lives of other people and communities, both within the UK and elsewhere, so to enrich our understanding of people, cultures, communities. Ofcom also states or suggests that public service broadcasting programming should be original, innovative, challenging, distinctive and of high quality, and that it should be widely available. So a kind of big ask. And of course you can decide whether or to what extent each of our public service broadcasting channels actually fulfill those remit. There's been a lot of talk in recent months over the purpose and how fit for purpose the BBC is, amongst other channels. But which of those channels would you say fulfills that criteria the most? Channel 4, BBC 1 or 2, ITV, or even Channel 5? Of course, we're looking at Channel 4 more specifically, and as well as the flagship channel being Channel 4, it actually has a portfolio, if you like, of other channels, which includes E4, More 4, Film 4, 4/7, and its catch-up and video-on-demand service called All 4. Unlike the BBC, Channel 4 does not have its own in-house production division. It is therefore defined as a publisher broadcaster, as what it does is commissions its programmes from independent production companies. So, for example, Humans was produced by Kudos for Channel 4. Significantly, this was also Channel 4's first international co-production, as it was co-financed by the American AMC network. So whilst Channel 4 is funded through advertising and sponsorship, it still has to fulfil this public service remit. So just a reminder, it should stimulate public debate on contemporary issues. It should provide programmes that have an educational value in some way or another. It should reflect the cultural diversity here in the UK. It should promote alternative views and consider new perspectives. It should, and this is a big ask for a TV show, but it should inspire change in people's lives. And of course, nurture new and existing talent within the industry. And that last one, which is so difficult and obviously subjective, but under a public service broadcasting remit, anything that Channel 4 is funding to be produced to broadcast on their channel should be creative, innovative, experimental and distinctive. So what we obviously have to consider is the extent to which AMC, Channel 4, Kudos have managed to do that with Humans. Significantly, Channel 4's recent marketing campaigns have highlighted as a commercially funded public service broadcaster by including a tagline, paid for by advertising, owned by you. This is interesting because it can be seen as a response to the threat of privatisation. Obviously, any publicly owned body always has that kind of shadow hanging over it. Obviously, most notably, we hear debates and arguments surrounding the National Health Service and how people are keen to keep hold of it. There is also a huge amount of concern over the privatisation of education as a sector, but maybe we rarely think of broadcasting as something that is perhaps under as much threat. But as I said, Channel 4 are using this slogan more and more frequently, paid for by advertising, owned by you. Maybe they're trying to reinforce and emphasise the economic and social value and its current business model and what it has to offer. Channel 4 has sought to defend its status as a publicly owned, commercially funded broadcaster, and this is all part of it. Channel 4 has also had to defend itself from accusations that it's become too commercial. For example, some critics have suggested that its acquisition of the Great British Bake Off from the BBC a few years ago doesn't sit comfortably with its reputation for risk-taking, experimentation and innovation. Key elements not only of Channel 4's brand identity, but also its public service remit. In response, Channel 4 has pointed out that it uses programmes that generate more revenue to cross-subsidise those with lower commercial value. So can we consider humans in any of these ways? So first question properly is, in what ways could humans be seen to help Channel 4 fulfil the requirements of their public service remit? In other words, how does humans tick those boxes that we've talked about so far as a public service broadcaster? Okay, let's move on and look at some of the other economic contexts of the show and look at some of the production companies. In particular, Kudos, who were commissioned by Channel 4 to produce this show. They're an award-winning British TV and film production company. They've produced shows for the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Sky, Amazon and Netflix, so they've got a good history of TV production, and also some real quality shows that have gained and garnered a lot of attention critically and commercially. If we look at just some of the titles, Broadchurch obviously stands out, Spooks, which ran for a long time, but also these other multinational co-productions like The Tunnel and Tin Star. Kudos has a parent organisation, you won't be surprised to learn, having looked at the Curran and Seaton model. This is the Shine Group, who were merged with the Dutch reality TV production company Endemol, who you may have heard of, to make the Endemol Shine Group. Shine Group was originally set up by Elizabeth Murdoch, who is the daughter of Rupert Murdoch. Perhaps, rather inevitably, the Endemol Shine Group was acquired by Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, which is now 21st Century Fox, which has, in recent years, been taken over by Disney. Let's look at more at AMC. AMC is an abbreviation for American Cable Network that began by broadcasting made-for-TV movies, classic movies, and also specialised in broadcasting unscripted TV, which, in other words, is reality TV or dramality television as well. This century, though, the network has broadened and branched out into its broadcasting original scripted material. Amongst the first scripted shows to be broadcast by AMC were Mad Men, the critically acclaimed TV show starring John Hamm about advertising agencies on Madison Avenue in the 1960s, but perhaps more famously, Breaking Bad, which is a show which needs little introduction for its enduring appeal and the huge success it had both critically and commercially. So it might seem like a simple question, but What are the benefits of a show like Humans being produced and broadcast by a range of different international companies? Try and make your answer as full as possible and consider some of the information that you've just received about Kudos and AMC. No industry lesson, or any media studies lesson for that matter, would be complete without application of some of our theoretical framework. We're looking at David Hesmagulch and his cultural industries theory. The idea that cultural industry companies try to minimise the risk and maximise the audiences through processes in which they're constructed, so vertical and horizontal integration are the main structures to these organisations, but also, and rather obviously, through the formatting of their products, in this case TV shows. So the use of stars, genres, franchises, whatever it is that products need to do, they will do that specifically to try and minimise risk and maximise audiences. So Hesmagulch goes on to say that the largest companies or conglomerates will now operate across a range of different cultural industries. In other words, they don't put all their eggs in one basket. They like to innovate. Convergence becomes more and more important, as does synergy. And this final idea that Hesmagulch sees the radical potential of the internet being contained to some extent by its partial incorporation into a large profit-orientated set of cultural industries. This is interesting to us because we've not really discussed it, but maybe it's something we can consider when we think about the marketing of a show, and that's what we're going to look at next. If you remember from our study on audiences, in a smart piece of marketing, Channel 4 and AMC actually produced a sort of what you might describe as alternative marketing campaign that established an independent company called Persona Synthetics, originally in keeping with the kind of alternate reality setting of the show Humans. In addition to that, they took this even further by creating a sort of fake Twitter feed that could be interacted with and followed and so on and so forth, which was the We Are People campaign set up by angry citizens of the UK who were concerned over the impact that synths would have. Again, this added to that kind of immersive real-world feel of this extended campaign, whilst also cleverly reinforcing and exploring a few more of the themes that the TV show itself included. So a proper sort of crossover convergence between the TV show and its marketing. Let's just quickly remind ourselves of that smart advert that is not for a TV show Humans, of course, but for the Persona Synthetics Corporation.
Meet Sally.
Hello, what can I do for you today?
She is your new best friend. The help you've always wanted. She is perfect in every way. She can do just about anything. She is faster, stronger, more capable than ever before. She can be just about anyone. Sally is part of your family. A teacher. A helper. A carer. A friend. She is whatever you want her to be. New generation Persona Synthetics, closer to humans than ever before. Humans, coming June on 4.
Fantastic. Just a brilliant sort of piece of fake marketing, captures exactly the conventions of the modern advertising, whilst also being completely sinister at the same time. So yeah, real variety of different types of marketing that was out there. You should have done some research into this as well when we were studying audiences regarding the social media and interactivity of some of the marketing here. So I'm going to give you this question. What would Hesmer Gulch have to say about this use of the internet, as well as the other ways in which the producers of Humans attempted to kind of minimise the risk of the show and maximise the profit? As we said at the beginning of the session, £12 million was the budget for Series 1, which is no small amount of money. So how were they able to minimise the risk of this show and maximise profit? But also, what else would Hesmer Gulch say? What would he say about the use of different types of media here? Let's move on then, finally, to one last section on, penultimate section, I should say, on television regulation. Now, this is going to be a fairly dry run through what the Office of Communication does to regulate TV, but it's a necessity. Feel free to do any additional research yourself, but I'm going to run through things here as swiftly as possible. The UK TV industry is currently regulated by Ofcom, as I said, Office of Communications. Their main duties set out by Parliament through the Communications Act of 2003, and the aim is to further the interests of citizens and consumers. In order to do this, Ofcom has to do the following things. It has to ensure that TV services are provided by a range of different organisations. It has to ensure that a wide range of high-quality programmes are provided, which appeal to a wide range of tastes and interests. It has to protect viewers from harmful or offensive material, much as the BBFC does when it comes to regulating the film industry. It has to protect people from unfair treatment and ensure that their privacy is not invaded, much as IPSO has to do with print regulation. So one of the main ways in which Ofcom seeks to maintain standards in TV programming is through what's known as the Broadcasting Code. This sets out a number of principles that broadcasters have to comply with. In setting and applying the code, Ofcom takes into account various factors, such as the likely size, composition and expectation of a potential audience, the degree of harm and offence likely to be caused, whether the inclusion of offensive material can be justified by the context in which it's shown. Section 1 of the code is to do with protecting people under the age of 18, again very much like the BBFC's role when it comes to regulating film, protecting them from unsuitable content. In order to do this, the TV broadcasters are required to observe the watershed. It's a term you've probably heard before. The watershed is basically, this means that material that is deemed unsuitable for children cannot be broadcast before 9 p.m. or after 5:30 a.m. And other aspects of the code that deal with violence, dangerous behaviour, discriminatory language, the portrayal of crime, for example. Factual programmes, the code stipulates that they must not mislead the audience and that any participants, either individuals or organisations, and they must be treated fairly. And also, it's important to remember, like the BBFC, Ofcom really aren't censors, they're more regulators. So shows and production companies are expected to meet the broadcasting rules, and complaints can be made to Ofcom, who then make a decision on whether that show can be continued to be broadcast. So hopefully you can see what I mean there, sort of somewhere in between, I suppose, a censor and a regulatory service. We do have a theorist, or two theorists, who write about media industries on our theoretical framework. These are Livingston and Lunt. This here pictured is Sonia Livingston. And this theory suggests that there is an underlying struggle in recent regulation in the UK between the need to further the interests in citizens by offering protection from harmful or offensive material, and the need to further the interests of consumers by ensuring choice or value for the money in market competition. I think this argument can sometimes be split down almost a kind of a freedom of speech lines, as it were, or a freedom to be to go about your life without being offended or feeling discriminated against by the media, versus a sort of a protected freedom of speech and freedom of expression. That is always going to be the spine of any argument relating to regulation of any industry. And then Livingston and Lunt go on to assert that the idea that the increasing power of global media corporations, together with the rise of convergent media technologies and transformations in the production, distribution and marketing of digital media, have placed traditional approaches to media regulation at risk. Well, this can be summarised very neatly by saying the way that media corporations are owned and taken over and are distributed, marketed, and additionally, how confusing the internet is, makes normal regulation straightforward, one body for one type of industry, very complicated. In even shorter terms, regulation is complicated, and that's because of patterns of ownership and because of the industry itself. Okay, let's very quickly apply this to humans, shall we? Because I don't think there's too much to say about regulation, although it is quite interesting. Humans, as we've said, manages to explore some complex and potentially really difficult issues regarding forced slavery, sexual assault, and themes of violence, without ever really being graphic or gratuitous. And as we've seen when we studied representation, the show manages to avoid a kind of voyeurism and objectification, particularly in its representation of women. So in this case, the show is able to remain inside the Ofcom guidelines without fear of being censored in any way, shape or form. So it's quite a clever one, this, and it's quite an interesting one which manages to maybe straddle that line. You may disagree. You might feel that perhaps the show plays it too safe, it doesn't challenge its audiences enough, or you may feel that perhaps it goes too far with certain issues. And finally, we're going to take a little tour through the future of television, which evidently will be a much bigger topic, and certainly one slide doesn't really seem appropriate to discuss such a big issue. However, there are some factors that you need to think about, and a couple of questions that I'm going to start with. The first one being, as a broadcaster, what do you think are the major factors to consider when you're scheduling a TV show? What we mean by scheduling is deciding where and when a show is going to be broadcast. So I just want you to spend a couple of minutes thinking about the factors that a broadcaster would consider when they're deciding when to put a show on. The second question I want you to consider is, what do you understand by the term non-linear viewing with regards to TV? This is a relatively new term, I suppose, regarding television, something we usually think of when we're talking about narrative, but what would you assume would be an understanding of the term non-linear viewing? Let's start with the scheduling question. And this is something that's been studied a lot in media studies, but obviously changes over time as the nature of television changes. So a few things you should have come up with or thought of. Suitability of the time of broadcast. Okay, not every show can be shown all the time. Things like the watershed comes into play, which is the guidelines as to when certain issues and images can be shown to protect young people. Also, you would consider what other programs are being shown by your rival broadcasters at the same time. Do you want to go up against a TV show that's incredibly successful already and well established? Do you want to take on a show that is perhaps in its infancy? Do you want to challenge a show that's maybe gaining dominance in the ratings with something brand new? But how do you build an audience? Do you start off in a time slot that's very uncompetitive or is in prime time so that people will get a chance to watch it? To build the audience up and then move it to a slot that maybe will take on a rival? Can you maintain an audience? Is the familiarity of when a show is broadcast on all the time important, or is that less important now in an era where people choose when and where they watch TV? Of course, how new the show is features into all of this. And then the last issue, again, something that is less relevant these days because of on-demand broadcasting, but what's going either side of the show. This refers to an old a strategy by broadcasters called hammocking, where they would place a brand new show in between two successful or established shows in order to inherit an audience that a new show might get from turning on or keeping watching the same channel, or whereby a show might be watched because audiences are turning over to that channel early to watch a successful or popular show. Moving on to this next question about what we mean by non-linear television, really tackles the rise in digital streaming services and on-demand sites individual networks have dramatically changed how people watch TV. What you need to consider is, how can this be considered an appeal to audiences? What does it offer them? Does it change who is watching the TV? Do you feel that this new change in viewing habits is more inclusive, or does it mean that actually some programmes run the risk of never being seen by anybody? And actually, from our perspective and from industry perspective, does this place a greater emphasis on marketing in your opinion? And does that begin to help us understand why some of the immersive marketing techniques of humans were taken as they were? Undoubtedly, we're going to see a change over the next few years when it comes to box set viewing, streaming services, and possibly we're going to reach a saturation point with this. However, all of that really is to unfold and for you to make predictions about.